Ghost Rider, one of the most gut-turning cartel execution videos explained. This is an infamous cartel execution video, and I don't recommend searching for it because it's definitely one of the worst. It took place in September 2020, and the victim's name is Ghost Rider, and he was apparently tortured for 3 days. And he was subjected to some of the worst acts of violence you will ever see. The video is about 2 minutes long, and it begins with Ghost Rider already in a horrible state. It appears his face has already been flayed, which means skinned, and what the killers do next is absolutely horrible. They get rubbing alcohol and pour it on his face, and keep in mind, his face has already been skinned, so just imagine the stinging pain. They then set Ghost Rider's face on fire, and his face is completely covered in flames, and is absolutely melting away right before your eyes. You hear the cartel members just laughing and mocking him as he burns and his face melts. Ghost Rider is letting out blood-curdling screams as the flames continue. The video then skips to later on in the day, or a couple days later. And Ghost Rider has been tortured and burned so severely that his whole head is basically just a red skull. There's no skin, there's no hair, there's no features, you can't even see his eyes. And after all of this, he is still alive. At the end of the video, they tell him to raise his head, which he does, which confirms he was still alive, and I have no idea how somebody can live through all of this. They then set his head on fire again to make him look like Ghost Rider with his burning skull. Apparently, the guy was nicknamed Ghost Rider because he would do the same thing to people that he caught, which was the reason they killed him in this exact way. This video is absolutely horrible and extremely gruesome. And it's in the same category as some of the worst videos like Funky Town, 3 Guys 1 Hammer, and much more. Whatever you do, don't go searching for this video because I guarantee you will regret it. This is Ghost Rider 2.0, one of the worst cartel execution videos ever explained. Just like the Ghost Rider cartel video, this video is extremely hard to watch. The video is kinda short, lasting only 1 minute and 35 seconds, and as you play the video, you see a man with his hands tied behind his back, and he is sitting on the ground wearing jeans and a blue shirt. His head is bleeding, and it's clear he got multiple injuries off camera. Multiple men can be heard in the background, and one of them seems to be interrogating the victim. As the victim is being interrogated, another man pulls the rope around his wrist, making sure it's tight. And for whatever reason, they place a hat on the victim's head. The leading theory is that it represents some gang which maybe the victim is part of. They then smack the victim around for a couple seconds, then another man enters the shot carrying a log that was recently in a fire. The log is smoking and smoldering, but it's not on fire. You see the hot charcoal glowing at the end of the log. The man then gets the log and places the hot end against the victim's chest, which makes the victim let out a terrifying scream. The victim then rolls around on the ground trying to get away from the man, but he then places a hot log against his back, and again causing the victim to scream horribly. The video then jump cuts and it shows the man pinning the victim down with the log by pushing it into the back of his neck. This immobilizes the victim as he's forced to take the unbearable heat of the log. At this point, you see the victim's jeans have been stripped and you see the skin around his thighs peeling off. This is due to the severe burning done off camera. The victim continues rolling around, but when he turns over on his back, he is then burned with the log on the side of his neck. They stop burning the victim for a couple seconds and he then sits up. Then, another man pours a clear liquid over his head, completely soaking his hair, clothes, and face. The other man then places the red-hot log between his legs, burning his exposed genitals. And this is where things take a turn for the worst. The video then jump cuts again, and it shows the awful sight of the victim's head being set on fire as well as his genitals. The fire completely engulfed the victim's head, face, and shoulders. Though he is still alive rolling around on the ground, which is why people refer to this video as Ghost Rider 2.0. As the video continues, the men insult the victim as he's on fire. The video ends as the victim is still alive rolling around on the ground, but he has stopped screaming at this point. This could be due to his damaged vocal cords from the fire. There's no reports about the victim's fate, but it's safe to assume they ended up killing him. This video and case is absolutely horrific, and it's just sad and scary that stuff like this happens daily to people. Take this warning and never go searching for this video because it's absolutely horrible. This is Funky Town, one of the worst cartel execution videos explained. Okay, before I begin, this is a massive trigger warning. The video begins in some sort of room and there is music playing. The first song that plays is Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, and the camera pans to the victim tied on the floor with some plastic wire, but the torture already began before the video starts. because the victim looks like he already went through complete brutality. His hands have already been cut off and his face has been completely flayed, which means skinned. There is no skin on the victim's face at all, and his eyes have been gouged out. And there is an insane amount of blood on the floor, but the most messed up part about this is that the victim is hooked up to some sort of IV, and the IV is pumping him with drugs to keep him alive and aware, making sure he felt everything happening to him. At the start of the video, they try and slit his throat with a sickle and press it against his jaw. But when the victim begins to scream, they shove a box cutter in his mouth to shut him up. His screams are absolutely gut-turning. They kept going from screaming to gurgling, from screaming to gurgling. And as the video progresses, they take the box cutter and slit his throat about 40 times, and keep in mind, the victim is still alive and aware of everything because of the drugs they are giving him to keep him alive. Also, the killers are mocking and laughing at the victim the entire time. They continue to try and slit his throat with the box cutter and were going at his neck numerous times, all while the song Funky Town was playing in the background, hence the name of the video. The killers kept having to physically restrain the victim, meaning there was still a lot of life left in him, and the amount of pain he had to be in is completely unimaginable. At one point in the video, a man had his foot on his chest holding him down, and another time they had shoved a pole in his mouth holding him in place. But the worst part about the video is towards the end, where the victim manages to loosen his arms from the restraints and immediately tries to touch his face. But remember, the victim has no face at all, no hands, and no eyes. But instinctively, the victim still tries to touch his face. It's absolutely horrifying, and the video then concludes. Keep in mind, the victim was still alive when the video ended, so who knows what else they did to him before he died. Because they were literally keeping him alive just to torture him. This victim went through so much pain and torment, and you can make an argument that nobody has ever been tortured as bad as this guy ever. I explain this based off pure memory from the first time I saw the video, because I won't dare watch it again because it's that gruesome. Everybody who saw videos like this always say Funky Town is the worst of the worst. And I honestly think that might be true, so please don't watch it and please don't search it up. The Funky Town Killers might have another video and I'm about to explain it. The video begins in a well-lit white room with white tiles on the floor. The tiles look extremely identical to the ones in Funky Town. In the opening seconds of the video, one of the killers is holding up a still beating heart to the camera, and while this is happening, you can hear the cameraman laughing hysterically. And you then realize there are multiple cartel members in the room and there are two dead guys lying on the ground. After the opening seconds, the camera goes to one of the victims' corpses on the ground, and since there are two dead victims with their hearts ripped out of their bodies, there is literally blood everywhere. The camera then stays on one of the victims' bodies and one of the cartel members then starts to behead him. And once the beheading was completed, the cartel members began to play soccer with the victim's head. The cameraman gets involved and they all begin kicking the head around, having fun. They are laughing, cracking jokes, and it's absolutely sickening. Every time the head is kicked around, you see the blood trail it leaves behind on the white tiled floor. After this, they then pose with the head and hold it up to the camera. The camera then pans to the other victim's body on the floor and you can see another cartel member dismembering the victim's arm. You see him slicing away with a knife. The camera then goes back to the other victim's body and you can see that they removed one of his arms, and at this point one of the cartel members gets down on his knees and begins having an arm wrestle with the severed arm of the victim, just laughing. It's absolutely horrible and disturbing, and the video then concludes. Now the video doesn't show the killings, but it's safe to assume they were carried out shortly before the video was recorded, since at the beginning of the video there was a beating heart. Now, not only is the brutal nature of the video terrifying, but also the setting of it. The setting looks exactly like the setting of the infamous video Funky Town. And many people who saw both videos are convinced it's the same room Funky Town was done in. But nothing at this point is 100% confirmed. But assuming from the gruesome nature of the video, and the white tiles, I do believe this was the same room Funky Town was done in. This video is extremely disturbing, and the cartel members laughing, having a good time, while kicking the victim's head around is just something you don't want to see. Please never go searching for this video because you will regret it. This is One Guy, One Hammer, one of the most brutal execution videos from Brazil explained. The video that I'm about to explain is about 1 minute long and I don't recommend searching for it. The setting is in some sort of room with a white tiled floor, and where do we know that from? The video is shot in a POV style with the killer standing over the victim. The victim is lying on the ground with a pool of blood underneath his head and blood all around the room. There is also a lot of random stuff surrounding the victim, like clothes and bags of trash, I'm guessing. As the video plays, you see the full extent of the victim's injuries. He's still alive but appears to be in and out of consciousness, and his head is swollen and bloody from the blunt force trauma. His jaw looks completely broken and shattered, and his eyes are swollen shut. At the start of the video, you see the killer carrying a hammer in a POV style as he mocks the victim. He sounds extremely psychotic, and the victim then responds with a groan. After this, the killer strikes the victim in the face around the jaw area with the hammer. The killer then talks to the victim in a soft tone and continues to mock him. The poor victim then makes a snoring type of noise. The killer then strikes him in the jaw again to shut him up. The killer then hits him again and again and begins talking to him. He does this a couple times, making the victim suffering even longer. At the end of the video, the killer goes complete full psycho mode and begins hitting the victim in the face over and over and over again. It's extremely brutal and very hard to watch. And as he is doing this, he's making a high-pitched squealing laugh which sounds like a witch. It's absolutely sickening, and after multiple hard strikes, he gets close to the victim and zooms in on his face. The victim's face is unrecognizable from the swelling and all of the blood caused by the hits from the hammer. The killer then talks to the victim in a soft tone, almost like you're talking to a dog or a child. From reports, the victim died from multiple hits to the head by the hammer, but other reports say he was stabbed off-screen, killing him. The sounds the victim makes in this video are absolutely stomach-turning, and you should never want to hear them. But what's even more disturbing is the psychotic nature of the killer. It was like he was playing a torturer in a horror movie, but it's real life. With real people, real blood, and real consequences. It's super disturbing and honestly just scary. Whatever you do, never go searching for this video. The most brutal cartel in Mexico just released a new video, and I'm about to explain it. The video is 1 minute and 31 seconds long. The video is shot in portrait mode, making it kinda hard to make out what's happening. As you play the video, you see 3 men lying on the ground with their hands tied behind their backs, and they are surrounded by at least 5 heavily armed sicarios. The captives also have their shirts pulled over their heads so they can't see. The sicarios kick the men as they plead for their life. One of the captives then cries out, "We are asking you to forgive us. We will cooperate with you guys." A sicario then responds, "Shut the F up with that BS." The man then pleads again, "Seriously guys, we never even messed with you." Another sicario then says, "What do you want me cutting off first then?" Which is met by a response by another sicario saying, "Go ahead and remove someone's head already. Go ahead, go ahead." One of the captives then has his face pushed into the dirt and you hear him struggling for breath. One of the sicarios then gets a knife out and proceeds to stab the victim in the back of the neck, which results in the victim making noises of pain. The sicario then stops as he realizes it isn't effective. He then turns the victim over slightly and slits his throat. Blood forms on the ground as the victim makes horrible crying and screaming noises, which is just haunting. He continues having his throat cut as the other victims wait their turn. Another sicario then asks for a knife and slits the second victim's throat. He then pushes him back so he's lying on the first victim who is bleeding out. Blood soaks his white shirt as blood pours out of his neck. The sicario then decides to inflict more pain on the victim before he bleeds out, and it looks like he takes his knife and quickly pokes it into one of the victim's eyes. And you actually hear a popping type sound. The second victim doesn't make as much noise as the first, but you still hear the sounds of blood leaking. The third victim is lying on the ground in a fetal position attempting to protect himself, however his head is pulled up exposing his neck, and a sicario then gets a knife and slices it into his throat. The knife is razor sharp and it cuts through the flesh and windpipe extremely quickly, until it reaches the victim's spinal cord, which is when the sicario stops so that the victim can bleed out. And that is where the video concludes. This video is extremely brutal like all cartel videos, and the screams and cries of the first victim is extremely haunting and nightmare-inducing. Don't go looking for this video for obvious reasons, and you should definitely stay curious on this video. And hopefully this explanation was enough to make you less curious.